You are watching my YouTube channel Bachelor and Master English. Today I have come up with a new topic of discussion. The title of my today's discussion is A Case of Identity. It's a detective thriller and a fantasy by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In our today's discussion, we shall be talking about the introduction, plot, summary and analysis. I am sure you will accompany me till the end of this video. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe my channel, and if you have been watching it, please share and don't forget to drop a like. Okay, here we go. This story, A Case of Identity, revolves around the case of Miss Mary Sutherland, a woman with a substantial income from the interest on a fund set up for her. She is engaged to a quiet Londoner who has recently disappeared. Sherlock Holmes' detective powers are barely challenged, as this turns out to be quite an elementary case for him, much as it puzzles Watson. The fiance, Mr. Hosmer Angel, is a peculiar character, rather quiet and rather secretive about his life. Miss Sutherland only knows that he works in an office in Leadenhall Street, but nothing more specific than that. All his letters to her are typewritten, even the signature, and he insists that she write back to him through the local post office. The climax of the sad liaison comes with Mr. Angel when he abandons Miss Sutherland at the altar on their wedding day. Holmes, noting all these things, Hosmer Angel's description and the fact that he only seems to meet with Miss Sutherland while her disapproving youngest stepfather, James Windibank, is out of the country on business, reaches a conclusion quite quickly. A typewritten letter confirms his belief beyond doubt. Only one person could have gained by this, Mr. James Windibank. Holmes deduces Angel had disappeared by simply going out the other side of a four-wheeler cab. After solving the mystery, Holmes chooses not to tell his client the solution, since if I tell her, she will not believe me. You may remember the old Persian saying, there is danger for him who takes the tiger cub, and danger also for those for whose so snatch is a delusion from a woman. There is as much sense in Hafiz as in Horace, and as much knowledge of the world. Holmes had earlier advised his client to forget Mr. Angel, but Miss Sutherland refused to take Holmes' advice and vowed to remain faithful to Angel until he reappears for at least 10 years. Holmes predicts Windibank will continue a career in crime and end up on the gallows. Okay, so here is the introduction of this story. Here we have the title, A Case of Identity. Author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, published in a series, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Genre, thriller, horror, mystery, fantasy. Theme, one cannot escape their fate. The fundamental thing in the story is that one can't escape their fate. Be careful you trust, whom you trust, what sort of person are you trusting. Actions have consequences. When you have certain action, you have to wait for consequence, and these are the themes that this is and setting of the story. Sherlock Holmes plays on Baker Street. Characters in the story are Mary Sutherland, Mr. Windibank, Mary's mother, Mrs. Windibank, Sherlock Holmes. These are the characters here. And now we go with the plot of the story. After Mary Sutherland comes to his door, he predicts this case will be more exciting. Sherlock Holmes is tired of boring cases. She says, that is Mary Sutherland, says her fiance Mr. Hosmer Angel is missing for a couple of days. Mary receives an annual or yearly income and is required to give it to her parents. Her father died years ago and her mother married a younger man. Mary says how her stepfather doesn't want her to get married. She rebelled and went to a ball where she met her future fiance, Mr. Hosmer Angel. Hosmer proposes and makes her promise to be true to him, no matter what happens to him. Hosmer vanishes on the very day of their wedding, leaving her at the altar. Mary is distraught at this. Sherlock Holmes is investigating the case, and he detects the criminal. He notices that Mr. Windibank has same handwriting as Mr. Hosmer Angel. Sherlock Holmes discovers that Mr. Windibank is Mr. Hosmer Angel. Okay. Mr. Windibank did this so that he could continue to receive the yearly income, and this would ensure she would never get married. Sherlock Holmes confronts and threatens to whip Mr. Windibank. Scared, Mr. Windibank runs away from that. He disappears from the sight of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock says Mr. Windibank continues to commit crimes until eventually he commits an act severe enough to earn himself the death sentence. Sherlock never tells Mary, for he thinks she will not believe him. That's the point here. Let's go with the summary in English now. Sherlock Holmes solves the problem identifying cheat and scoundrel. This scoundrel is none other than so-called Mr. Windibank. Mary Sutherland, a young woman, visits Holmes to ask for help with finding out what has happened to Hosmer Angel, a man she had fallen in love with and was just about to marry when he disappeared. She explains that she lives with her mother and stepfather, James Windibank, the three of them living comfortably on money from her late father. From the fact that the letter Mary received from Hosmer Angel was typewritten and other suspicious clues, Holmes deduces the truth behind the mystery. He invites Mr. Windibank over an interview and reveals that he knows that the latter had in fact impersonated Hosmer Angel in order to prevent we see half daughter here, daughter from marrying. He had hopped out from the carriage in which he was riding to be married with Mary, and so effected a disappearance that would have resulted with the promise as Hosmer Angel extracted from Mary to never marry anyone else, in marriage never entering into marriage and thus never depriving him of the family money. After examining the typewritten letters, Windibank's act of absence and Hosmer meeting Sutherland and Hosmer not speaking much or not signing the letter in his own hand gave the confirmed fact that Windibank himself was Hosmer and nobody else. Now it's time for us to tell the story in Nepali. यो पहिचानको केस कथा सर अर्थर कोनान डोयलको एउटा चर्चित जासुस विषयसँग सम्बन्धित कथा हो। यस कथाले अपराध गर्ने मान्छे र अपराधबाट उसको चाहिँ उम्किने उपाय के छ त्यो खोजेको हुन्छ। कसरी मान्छे चाहिँ अपराध गरेर पनि आफ्नो मान्छेहरुसँग नजिकै बस्ने र अनि उनीहरुसँग आफू सज्जन छु भन्ने देखाउन खोज्छ। शर्लक होम्स एउटा नामी जासुस थिए। उनको काममा साथी नै भनौं डाक्टर वाटसन थिए। उनीहरु प्रहरीका कटु आलोचक पनि थिए र प्रहरीको यथार्थता बुझ्न नसक्ने उनीहरुको ठहर थियो। कथा यसरी सुरु हुन्छ। मेरी सदरल्यान्डको लोग्ने के को खोजीबाट सदरल्यान्ड होम्सका आउनु, मतलब इथरिजको लोग्ने शर्लक होम्सले दिएको सफलताको कारणले थियो। आफ्ना पिता विन्डीब्याङ्क हराएको केटीको खोजी नगरिदिएको कारणले सदरल्यान्ड होम्स कहाँ गएकी थिइन्। अब विन्डीब्याङ्क सदरल्यान्डको सौतेलो बाबु थियो। उसको आमाले बाबुको मृत्युपछि विन्डीब्याङ्कसँग बिहे गरेकी थिइन्। विन्डीब्याङ्क साह्रै कुटिल थियो। उसले सुश्री सदरल्यान्डको आमालाई बसमा पारेको थियो र आमा साथै छोरीको आम्दानीमा जिउने र छोरी समेतलाई भोग गर्ने एउटा चाल विन्डीब्याङ्कले रचिरहन्थ्यो। झड्किली छोरी सदरल्यान्डको आम्दानी राम्रो स्रोत भएकोले उसले भेष बदल्छ र मेरी सदरल्यान्डको संसारमा श्री हस्मर एन्जलको रूपमा देखा पर्छ। ऊ भन्छ कतै काम गर्छ, मात्र टाइप गरेको चिठी पठाउँछ। छोरी पार्टीमा जाँदा होस् वा कतै घुम्न जाँदा घर बाहिर निस्कन्छ र भेष बदलेर एन्जलको रूपमा छोरीसामु उभिन्छ। प्रेम गरेको केही दिनभित्रै उसले हस्मरको रूपमा सदरल्यान्डसँग विवाहको स्वाङ रच्छ। गिर्जाघर पुग्दा हुँदी घोडा बग्गीबाट गायब हुन्छ। सदरल्यान्डले त्यस दिनदेखि हस्मरको रूपमा यो भेष बदलेको विन्डीब्याङ्कलाई भेट्दैन। त्यस कारणले ऊ शर्लक होम्स कहाँ आउँछ। शर्लक होम्सले टाइपको अक्षर, विन्डीब्याङ्क काम गर्ने थलोबाट प्राप्त विवरण र स्वरमा आएको परिवर्तन आदिलाई हिसाब गरेर अथवा विश्लेषण गरेर मध्यनजर गरेर सदरल्यान्ड नामको झड्किलो बाबु नै हस्मर एन्जल भएको निर्णय गर्छ। यसरी हस्मर एन्जल भएर आफ्नै सौतेलो बाबुले झड्किली छोरीलाई चाहिँ यसरी चाहिँ फसाउन खोजेको कथा हामीले चाहिँ यहाँ पढ्न पाउँछौँ। त्यसो भएर मान्छेले चाहिँ अब आफ्नो नाताले के हो, कसो हो, काम के हो, कसो गर्छ सबै नबुझिकन कसैको विश्वास नगर्नु भन्ने चाहिँ यहाँ भनिरहेको छ। ओके, द्याट्स वी गो विथ द एनालिसिस नाउ। Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's detective Sherlock Holmes appeared in 56 short stories and 4 full-length novels. A Case of Identity is one of the lesser-known stories in the series because the case does not focus on a major crime in the same way as the majority of the other tales do. In A Case of Identity, Holmes does not deal with a robbery or a murder as in earlier cases, but with the disappearance of his client, Mary Sutherland's fiance. Holmes' ever-present sidekick, Dr. Watson, does not know what to make of the case, but Holmes doesn't need to leave the confines of his flat at 221B Baker Street to solve it. As in several other stories, the primary motivation behind the crime in A Case of Identity is a man's desire to control a woman in order to remain in possession of her money, a logic that reveals the tight connection behind financial matters and sexual politics in Victorian England. When a woman falls in love and decides to marry, the proceedings necessarily have a large impact on the apportioning money in her family. The story also contains a scene of confrontation with a criminal that is remarkable for the highly moral stance that Holmes takes. Speaking to Windibank, Holmes even goes so far as to threaten extra legal violence, something later he never does before or after. The law cannot, as you say, touch you, said Holmes, yet there was never a man who deserved punishment more. If the young lady has a brother or a friend, he ought to lay a whip across your shoulders. It is not a part of my duties to my client, but here is a hunting crop handy, and I think I shall just treat myself too. Implicit in this speech are two notions worth remarking often, namely that a male relation ought to avenge the wrongdoing, and that although such an assault would not be sanctioned by the law, it would be socially accepted. Okay, this is the analysis. Now, summing up what we have discussed in this story is very short summary that will help you to remember the story and to write in the exam. Miss Mary Sutherland consults Sherlock Holmes because her fiancé, Mr. Hosmer Angel, disappeared just before their wedding. After hearing her story, Sherlock Holmes thinks this case is quite simple as he knows some similar cases. By a simple exchange of letters with Mr. Windibank, Mary's stepfather, he manages to confound him. The latter confesses that to avoid the loss of his stepdaughter fortune, he disguised himself and pretended to be Mr. Angel to seduce her. The girl fell into the trap. He made her promise to remain faithful to him. Angel, whatever life events may occur, his idea was to eliminate Angel so that Mary remains forever single and that he could enjoy the rent of his stepdaughter. Unfortunately, Holmes cannot do much because Windibank done nothing actionable. He decides not to tell anything to Mary as she would not believe him. Okay, with this I have come to the end of today's discussion regarding the story A Case of Identity. Holmes solves the cases easily, and he has the power of sensing the crime and how to investigate the crime. So this is the power of investigating crime tells us that we need to be aware about each and every happenings around us, and who is to trust and who is not to trust. We should be very careful about trusting people and behaving people in the similar way. Thank you very much for your time and patience.